Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining me this morning, and thanks, Jill, for inviting me. I'm really happy to be able to give this talk to you, and hopefully we can all leave being a little enlightened, or a little bit enlightened. I didn't say how much enlightened you might need to be, but let's hope we can all learn something today, including myself. So what are the economic effects of COVID-19 on charitable donations? That's the talk today. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to start by just broadening out from that question, which is a bit narrow, to ask why should we think the crisis will affect anything having to do with economics? When we talk about economics, we're not talking about money. We're talking about people's choices and how people make choices in a world where there's scarce resources. And we're talking about how society makes choices in the same world. So insofar as the crisis affects people's choices, it is likely to have economics implications. So how will the crisis affect people's choices? It will affect people's choices because the virus, COVID-19, has caused changes in government policy in response to the virus, and it's caused great changes in the amount of uncertainty that people have about health and economic outcomes, both now and in the future. So short-term future and long-term future. So those two main drivers then will force people to start to think about how they might want to change the choices that they make. Why do we actually care about it? Well, we're all economists, or if you're not an economist, I hope you're interested in economics. So I'll tell you why we care from an economics point of view. So we've got these COVID-19 induced changes to policy and to the amount of uncertainty that people and the economy are experiencing in the world. What that means is that there will be changes to people's underlying present and future constraints. And those constraints have to do with income and prices. I don't know if we have some, I think we have some of our students here, so think budget constraints. And also expectations. When people do expected utility maximization and their expectations change, then they have to attach different probabilities to the likelihood of experiencing different outcomes in the future. So all of these things mean that the fundamental environment in which people are operating and making decisions has actually changed. That means people will have to re-optimize. And when I say that, I simply mean individuals will have to re-maximize their own utility subject to their new constraints and different expectations. What that means then, if we think about our first year economics and our basic utility maximization problem, individuals will have to achieve a tangency between a different indifference curve and their new budget constraint or their new choice set. That means they'll make new individual optimal choices about everything that they do. This is about what to consume, when to consume, how much to save, how much to work, how much to conversely take leisure, and also their giving choices, how much to donate to charitable causes, and a lot of other things too. If we add up all of these new optimal choices and new bundles of consumption goods that people choose after doing the re-optimization in response to the COVID crisis, then that will amount to a completely different overall allocation of resources in the economy. Some people will be made better off, some people will be made worse off. It's possible everybody will be made worse off. And what that means, as economists, the main thing that we're interested in and the main criteria that we use to evaluate any kind of outcome, that means that COVID-19 has implications for equity, it has implications for efficiency, and has implications for overall societal well-being. How big those implications are, we suspect they're quite big. We've been driven into a recession. A lot of people are out of work. There's going to be probably dramatic changes to inequalities and also to the way that we produce things, how we produce things, and the general question of what we produce. So there are going to be real economic effects of COVID-19 in general. I'm not talking about in general though. I'm actually talking about donation decisions in particular. So the crisis will have these kind of overall effects, and as economists, we can now kind of imagine how people will actually incorporate these changes and how they might actually re-optimize and what that re-optimization implies for the allocation of resources in the economy. And the crisis is going to affect choices about many things, but it will also affect choices about how much to give, whether to give or not, which causes to donate to, when to donate, and how to donate. And those are the questions and the issues that we're going to look at today. How have the changes induced by the COVID-19 crisis affected charitable contributions and charitable contribution decisions, such as the ones I list here? What do we know? And what might we infer from kind of just our understanding of economics and putting our economics knowledge to work? Who's scribbling on my slide? So somebody scribbled here, that's fine. So what I'm going to do today is provide evidence from economics research and recent data about what's actually happened to charitable donations since the COVID crisis has hit. And I'm going to provide further insights from economic theory about what we might expect these decisions to look like if we can't tell at the moment. And that's going to be the focus of what I talk about today. So the place to start here is to first of all ask the question, without having to make a lot of work for us, because we like to be efficient. Let's ask the question, well, can we already answer these questions about the likely effects on charitable donations of the COVID crisis? And the answer is, sadly, no. We can only understand the answers to these questions after we collect enough data about how donations have responded since the COVID crisis hit. Not only to sort of an aggregate donations, what's happened to donations overall, but also to the distribution of donations across causes. So we need to collect data on donations to a wide variety of causes, and we need to have that data be collected over a long enough period of time. And that is a recent piece of research that I did that showed the importance of this. If we don't have data that's rich in charity space and in time, then we could we can actually come to the wrong answers and make wrong conclusions about what's going on. The crisis is so recent. I mean, we're talking about mid-March, late March, when the government implemented its lockdown, and the first cases happening in China just before the new year. It's recent, it's ongoing, it's not over, and we don't just have that data, obviously. So what can we do then? As economists, we can actually do two things. We can try to get recent data about what's happened since the crisis, although, you know, just to give us an idea about how donations are starting to respond, although we might not be able to draw big conclusions about what's going on from that data. And we can also look at the literature on economic, take lessons from economic research to see if that has anything to say about what is going on. So we can provide evidence about changes in donation decisions from peer-reviewed economics papers, the kind of papers that myself and my colleagues write. And we can also try to get data from organizations. I have a very good working relationship with the Charities Aid Foundation, and they kindly offered to give me their most recent data on charitable donations, which is recent up to the end of April 2020. So this is the most recent data in the world about what's been going on with charitable donations since the COVID crisis hit. So we can look at that to answer those questions. And then we probably won't get a lot of answers because the crisis is so recent and ongoing. But what we can do then is use economic theory and put on our economist hat to provide further insights about what we might expect to happen to donation decisions. So I'm going to do those. I'm going to look at the questions about what happens to donation decisions with in two different lights. First, looking at what's actually been going on and what research actually says about the situation. And second, trying to speculate a bit, thinking about economic theory about what we might expect to happen. So here are the questions I'll look at. Do individuals make decisions about whether or not to donate? In economics, we call that the extensive margin decision. Do you want to become a donor or not? If they do become a donor, they have to make decisions about how to change their donations, how much, which causes. Most people give to 6 or 7 different charitable causes. Most people don't just make contributions to one cause. And that's up to individuals, what they prefer to give to. And the crisis might actually cause individuals to shift the composition of their donations across causes, and that can have implications, as we'll show. We might make decisions about when to donate, today, tomorrow, never, taking into account things like uncertainty, changes in disposable income, modes of giving, and they will definitely make decisions about how to donate. Should they use cash? Should they use direct debit? They might even volunteer instead of giving donations in cash. They might give donations in time instead. So we'll start with the first question on whether or not to donate. Has the COVID crisis had an effect on people's decisions about whether or not to be donors? And we'll start by thinking about this using evidence from economics research and CAF data that was given to me. So the CAF data, which is recent, like I said, for April 2020, showed actually no big swing in the number of donors in the economy. It's roughly the same as in previous years. If we take the average of April between 2017 and 2019, roughly 34% of respondents on CAF's UK Giving Survey actually said that they would donate. There's no evidence from economics research to suggest the crisis will actually create more givers. The economic researchers, we talk about the extensive margin and the intensive margin in our modules and our courses. And the extensive margin is, should I open for business? Should I become a donor? The intensive margin is, given that you're open, how much should I produce? And given that I've decided to donate, how much should I donate? And we tend to ignore the extensive margin in a lot of research, but it does matter. But unfortunately, we don't have anything that we can say about it, about this crisis, and there's no research about it at the moment related directly to this crisis. What about using economic theory to provide further insights? So again, economics is about people. It's about how people make choices. And it's about how people respond to situations that change in terms of the things that they make choices about. How do they change the trade-offs and the balances that they achieve when they make their consumption choices and other choices? So you're a person, you're there, you're a donor, COVID hits. Do you want to still donate or not? Well, economics theory says that we would expect more givers if people are motivated. So in somebody's utility function, if you want to think about it, their preferences have a characteristic which relates to some feel-good factor of being a donor. People might just feel good about being donors. If that feel-good factor is actually enhanced by the crisis, so the warm glow of being a donor actually intensifies after something like the COVID crisis, people might feel, oh, I'm a donor and now I'm more important than I was before because there's more need. What that would do would raise the total private benefit of giving. I'm not talking about marginal benefits here because this is an extensive margin decision, not an intensive margin decision. It would raise the total private benefit of giving, and so it would change that extensive margin given of whether or not to donate, and it might push more people into the donation category, donor category. Whether or not this happens depends on whether people are in fact motivated by the warm glow of being a donor. We don't have concrete evidence. The jury's still out on a lot of questions relating to what motivates giving. The closest piece of evidence is a recent paper that I've written with Miguel Amunia, Imran Jukari from Oxford, Ben Lockley from Warwick, and that looks at UK tax returns. And it shows that if there's a change in what we call the price of giving, so giving becomes cheaper for an individual through an enhancement of tax incentives for giving, then more people will actually choose to become donors. So if we map that onto this argument that I'm making about warm glow would make the benefit of giving bigger relative to sort of the cost, and so that could, we might sort of speculate that that would have the same effect and drive more people into the donor category of givers, more people into making donations than before. That's the most we can say at the moment, though. And that's just, this conclusion is just based on first year microeconomic principles. There's nothing fancy going on here. We're not talking about behavioral economics, the way people talk about it, or experiments. We're talking about using our standard economics framework of utility constrained utility maximization to ask if that can speak to this issue. When we find things going on in the world that our framework can't explain, then we might resort to looking at behavioral effects or emotions and things like that. But so far, our framework has actually been shown to be really a good framework for evaluating these kinds of questions. We can actually relate these things to costs, benefits, prices, effective prices. So how much to donate? Well, again, let's look at the evidence from existing research and CAF data. Well, we don't know. So CAF was a bit frustrated because I kept bugging them. I said, well, how much are people giving? And they only collect, while they're collecting information on the UK Giving Survey about how much people donate, and somebody somewhere has that information for March and April of 2020. The company that they use to collect the information doesn't release it until the end of the year. So we don't know yet what the effects are on the amount of money that people are actually choosing to donate as a result of the crisis. What we can say is that the lockdown and changes in disposable incomes have implications for people's consumption choices. As I mentioned on the first slide, people will re-optimize, and those consumption choices include decisions about charitable giving. We also know that donations are a normal good, and we know that from my piece of work with Almunia, Kucheri, and Lockwood. We actually analyzed 78 million tax records, UK tax records, and had to spend hours and hours and days at Revenue and Customs Secure Data Lab. So we're pretty confident about this, that when we say donations are a normal good, we calculated an income elasticity of donations equal to plus 0.12%, which means that a 1 percentage point increase in income would lead to a 0.012% increase in donations. They're a normal good. When income goes up, donations go up. So if some people experience an increase in income as a result of the crisis, we would expect them to actually increase the amount of money that they contribute to charity. That's the most we can say, though. Well, we can actually think about the question, just again, using our principles of microeconomic theory and our standard framework about whether we can sort of speculate further on the answers to the question of how much will people change in terms of their donation amounts as a result of the crisis. So let's think about it and walk through our model, really. This is just our economics model here. Think about the effect of the lockdown and the recession, and therefore we are in a recession, make no doubt about it, on people's disposable incomes. I'm just calling that Y because my slide got really long when I left disposable income in. The disposable income now is uncertain. Some people are working from home since the lockdown. And they're managing to work from home and not experience any change in their disposable income or their take-home pay. Some are experiencing a period of, so I should be clear here, some people work from home, they're not experiencing a change in their income, or they might change what they purchase, which will affect their disposable income. So I've kind of made a mistake here. I shouldn't call it disposable income here, I should call it income in this paragraph. Some experience a period of unemployment because they've been laid off as a result of the lockdown and the recession, and then they might experience a fall in their income. Other people are working from home, but there's been a general contraction of the economy, of all sectors of the economy. And if you want to know more details about the severity of that, you can just open up any newspaper or go to the Office for National Statistics, which is publishing these data on a regular basis. But last month, we experienced a 23% fall in GDP, which hit all sectors of the economy uniformly, essentially. What this means is that incomes have changed, and if we think about a budget constraint for a consumer, a budget constraint says that the amount of money I make, my income, has to equal the amount of money I spend, which is the value of what I spend on different kinds of commodities. So if your income falls, that means there are implications for consumption choices, and those include charitable giving choices. An individual's budget constraint has been affected by, may have been affected by this crisis. Now that's about how much people bring home, but that's not their disposable income. People earn money and they spend it on all sorts of things. And social distancing has changed the composition of what people choose to purchase and the amount that they choose to spend. And that means then there are implications for disposable income, and those means there are implications for people's consumption choices and charitable giving choices. So changes in people's income and in what they spend their money on and how much they spend their money will have implications for their final kind of new optimal consumption bundle, including giving choices. So the answer to whether donations go up after this crisis or not depends on what people do. It depends on people's individual preferences. It depends on how people reevaluate and trade off all of their spending decisions, not just those related to charitable donations. What that means in terms of the language we've developed in your 3 years at Birmingham is that the answers depend on income elasticities, how responsive are purchases to changes in income, own price elasticities. If there's a 1% change in the price of a commodity, what percentage change in consumption does that lead to? And in cross-price elasticities, when people are making their consumption decisions, are donations substitutes or complements to other things in the consumption bundle? And how those ultimate kind of bundles change will depend on all of three of these things. And so once we know that this is just about elasticities, you can actually run through some cases in your head on your own time, because I don't have time to do it, but you know, what if the income elasticity were this, what if, and then you could actually get some answers that would be quite powerful predictors of the behavior that we expect to emerge from this crisis. Let's move on to the third question, which is what causes should people donate to? Now, this is a big question for me in terms of my research agenda. And the reason it's a big question for me is that there are 360,000 registered charities in England, for instance. And the range of causes that those charities deliver their benefit, the range of causes of those charities is vast. We have donkey sanctuaries, where there's a charity in Canada called Free the Nipple, which is a charity about encouraging women to go braless, and somehow they got charitable status from the Canadian government. 14 donkey sanctuaries in England. There are donkey sanctuaries for donkey relief to Israel, donkey sanctuaries for donkeys with ingrown hoofs, donkey sanctuaries for donkeys that don't have nice looking fur, all sorts of different kinds of causes. Now, the reason I'm interested in the composition of causes is because we know very little about it, but as a public policy person, government actually gives tax incentives to people when they make donations to charities, and those tax incentives don't discriminate across causes. And so questions that are interesting to me are, well, should we have tax incentives that are cause specific? Tax incentives are paid for by taxpayers, and we would have to ask, well, would the government step in and provide that public good and service if the charity shut down? And quite often the answer is no. So I'm interested in this question. I'm interested in developing a body of evidence about the question. I'm interested in its broader implications. What's happened since the crisis? Well, I'm not surprised to find out that the data shows there have been really big shifts in donation behaviors. Comparing April 2020 to the average in April for the last 3 years, we see donations to hospitals and hospices in just 1 month have gone up by 14%. Donations have gone down by 9% to children and young people. Donations have gone down to animal welfare. They've gone down to medical research. So far, donations to overseas aid have been unaffected. These are big shifts in donation behaviors, and these will have economic implications in the short term and in the long term, not just for sort of public policies, but also for things, inequalities. And I think a lot of these shifts suggest that widening inequality is something that we might expect in the future. A big question that the charitable sector in England has, and that's something that they complain about whenever there's a massive fundraising drive, is such as the ALS fundraising drive, which generated millions and millions of pounds all over the world, the Ice Bucket Challenge. Charities not really involved with the beneficiary charity in that fundraising drive really complain bitterly that that fundraising drive cannibalized donations that they would have otherwise gotten. So a question is, well, if donations are shifting in this way, is this pattern, this change in the pattern of donations going to persist over the long term? And will, say, donations to hospitals and hospices going up by 14% mean over the longer term donations to other things will go down by 14% or not? It's not clear. We don't know the answer now. We need long-term data across all sorts of different charities and across time. That data is really hard to get. I got it, and I'm going to talk about it on the next slide. So here we can use economic theory. Now, I've got a recent paper which uses Charities Aid Foundation data over a 15-year period, uses every single Charities Aid Foundation account holder. People can open an account at the Charities Aid Foundation, put money in their account, and then make donations. In the data, we see individuals, not their identity. We don't care about that. We just see individual donation decisions. We know when they're made. We know how they're made. We know which charity donations are made to. And we have a little bit of demographic information about the people making the donations, such as whether they're male or female, and a general idea about their postcodes, a general idea about their age. We used all of this data, which was really, really rich data set, unique in the world, to actually ask the question, if there's a massive fundraising appeal, does that cannibalize donations to other things? Or how can we actually, how does that change the pattern of donations across different causes? So the finding from the CAF data in April that there's these big shifts in donation behavior is really consistent with the evidence that we have available in our paper. We found that fundraising appeals lift total donations, with increased donations received by charities launching the appeals, but they don't displace donations received by other non-appeal charities. So there's not cannibalization. Other charities that aren't related to the fundraising appeals see an increase in the donations in the immediate aftermath of, we looked at disaster appeals in particular, but that immediate rise is entirely negated by subsequent reduction in donations over time, but the overall effect is zero. There's no cannibalization. So disaster appeals as a form of fundraising appeal bring donations received by other charities forward in time, but don't boost or reduce them. And that's a really important finding. We show that it's important to collect data in the charity space and over enough time. And we see that people do shift their composition of causes, but because they also change the timing of their donations, we might actually come to the wrong conclusions unless we have data over that time. Now, this is what the data showed us from the Charities Aid Foundation. As economists, we don't want to just stop there. We want to, although Joe might like me to stop, we're a bit over, I should be finished in a few minutes. We want to ask why, what behavior, what kind of preferences, what motives for giving can explain these patterns that we see in the data. What we found, well, we know that any changes in donation behavior are driven by people's motives for giving. Those motives could be altruistic. People could care just about the public good, not have any selfish component, or they could be warm will motives where they might also care about the fact that they're making a donation and they could feel good about that. And those are just perfectly private concerns. The findings in our paper, we can rationalize that those shifts in the patterns of giving after major fundraising appeals if fundraising initiatives trigger relatively more cause-specific warm will of giving. So in the case of a natural disaster, that could trigger an explanation for what we find is that that triggers an enhanced warm glow of giving to disaster relief charities. And that actually then changes the marginal benefit, marginal cost calculation of giving to those charities versus other charities for a donor. And whether giving to causes unrelated to the appeal then go up or not depends on whether that warm glow of giving to those other causes is a substitute or complement to the warm glow of giving to the appeal related causes. Exactly using just standard, very basic economic principles. Likewise, if the warm glow of giving to other causes is a complement to the warm glow of giving to the disaster relief charities, then it would increase. And if substitutes, then disaster appeals would get more at the expense of donations to other causes. And this is actually what we see, this third bullet point at the bottom is what we see in the data. In the period immediately following a fundraising intervention, we see donations to the appeal causes spiking, and we see donations to all causes, all other causes going up as well. So we see a general lift in donations after a fundraising appeal. That would suggest that donations to the fundraising appeal charities and other causes are complements to each other. They have to be consumed in fixed proportions. However, that effect we show in the paper is actually masked by the fact that people adjust their timing of donations. The donations to the other causes fall then after that. So people move forward their donations to other causes. It makes it seem that they're complements, to the fundraising causes, but they're actually not, because over time, those then dwindle back to what we call the baseline. So it's really important for us to understand more about the motives for giving. And I think if we can actually try to attach what we're going to see in terms of the changes in the patterns of giving after we collect enough data to those motives, and actually our paper has kind of come closer for us and has given us brought us closer to the kind of big identification issue. Can we actually show cause and effect of one warm glow motive versus another, or altruism versus warm glow? Now, I'm going to skip quickly through the last two bullet points because not much to say about them. We don't know anything about how the COVID crisis has changed people's decisions about when to donate. What we know is that this is again a very interesting question. If we start thinking about what research has, or what economics principles have to tell us, and then we kind of think, have people looked at this? The answer is no. So it's a really fruitful area for future research. But the crisis has caused a structural shift in people's expectations and how they're actually going to look at the future and discount it. People have a lot more uncertainty. People have uncertainty about health services, pressure on health services and equipment. They have health concerns for themselves, their loved ones. They have uncertainty about how long it's going to take for a vaccine to be found. They have uncertainty about whether they'll be back on campus in September, about when they can go to their graduation in person, uncertainty about financial market outcomes, uncertainty about how the public finances will be brought to order. There's more uncertainty in the world now than there ever has been, I think, in any living person's memory. And it's not clear how all of this uncertainty is actually going to affect people's donation decisions and all their other decisions. What we do know is that when there's an increase in uncertainty, people should actually save more for this future. So they should try to insure themselves against that uncertainty by increasing savings now. But we don't know whether that is actually then going to imply more or less donations. It's a really interesting question, and I'm hoping actually to be able to look at this in future if I ever find time. How to donate, cash giving's gone up, web debit card giving has actually gone up. Cash giving is really fallen down to zero almost, according to the CAF data, whereas web and debit card giving has rapidly increased. We would expect that. What does the theory have to tell us? Well, this is again, another sort of unexplored area of economics research, which hasn't really provided any answers that I could actually think of taking forward in this part of the presentation. And really the question is, what is money? Why does it matter? And what happens when the nature of money changes in terms of the way that people behave? So I'm not sure what I can take from theory. Of course, there's transaction costs, right? Credit card, debit card are less costly, so the fixed costs of buying things with them might have fallen, which means people will use those more. So that's standard kind of economic principles. But in conjunction with these changes in modes of giving, and us not having a clear understanding what money is in the first place and why it matters, people's giving is changing. Access to crowdfunding, people are giving more to crowdfunding platforms, which is weird. And people are engaged a lot more in charity drives, usually at the local level. So we have to take into account all of these different things, and the implications for donations decisions is just not clear. Now, I would like to wrap up here and just say, you know, it's a uncertain period of time. We don't really know what will happen. We can make some guesses, but there are also other things going on besides important considerations to take into account, besides the very fundamental ones that I've laid out here. Those include tax incentives, public funding, private contributions. Public goods and services can be provided coercively through taxes or privately through charitable contributions. Charitable contributions are called voluntary contributions because they're not a tax. And that's going to raise a lot of questions about how those modes of provision will change when there are debates that could take place about how to remedy the public finances. One of the first things government does when it's in public finance difficulty is look to cut tax incentives. And so there's going to be hot debates about this issue. Also, social situations. Most giving takes place in social situations. 90% of giving takes place in social situations, not in the privacy of people's own homes over their internet connection. And social distancing and lockdown have completely disrupted those giving channels. So I suspect giving and charitable activities will be channeled to local needs, but again, that'll have then implications for how giving is distributed across different causes. I think government support for charities in other forms outside tax incentives will dry out, and then that'll also have distributional implications for the composition of charities that are supported. Our local communities, we're going to get back into Tony Blair's third way, or George Bush's old concept of 1,000 points of light, making communities strong, which essentially means local communities are going to have to pick up the slack and do it themselves. Likewise, the structure, shape of the charitable sector is going to be affected. That will have implications for competition, which is inefficient in the charitable sector, and for equity and also subsequently social welfare. And likewise, our new charity is going to have to emerge so that can actually respond to the pandemic. We have lots of international aid agencies that can respond to things overseas, but we don't have many that can respond to this kind of crisis at home. Finally, the broader angle on all of this, and the reason I got interested in public policy and public economics in the first place, is that public goods and services are provided by government and by the private voluntary sector. And what is the boundary between the provision of private versus public? How is that boundary going to be then redrawn, not just over the short run, but also over the medium and long run? All of this is going to be endogenous, and that's going to mean a lot of different things for different kinds of charities, for different people, and also for government and the way we move forward. So thank you very much, which is my next and last slide. Thank you.